All right, let's dive into a really fascinating spiritual paradox today, one that comes from the mystic St. John of the Cross. It's a question that, it kind of seems to challenge everything we think about divine guidance. It goes like this. If supernatural visions can actually be dangerous, why in the world would an all-wise God use them to talk to us? It feels like a contradiction, right? Well, let's unpack the answer he gives.
So, yeah, that's the big question we're wrestling with. It's totally counterintuitive, isn't it? I mean, think about it. If a path is full of potential traps and dangers, why would the perfect guide tell you to go that way? It just doesn't seem to make sense. This puzzle, it really gets to the very core of what the spiritual journey is all about.
And look, this isn't just us reading into it centuries later. The author himself, St. John of the Cross, he lays this problem out crystal clear. He's the one asking why God, who he calls all-wise, would ever use a method that could end up being a danger and a hindrance. He puts the question right out there, right at the beginning, basically setting the stage for the incredible answer he's about to build.
Okay, so to solve this puzzle, the author doesn't just jump right into talking about visions. Nope. First, he takes a step back. He lays out these universal principles that govern how God acts in the world. You can think of them as the fundamental rules of the road for everything really, including the spiritual journey.
And this framework is it's so logical. First off, God's actions aren't random. They're super ordered and have a purpose. Second, growth doesn't happen all at once. It's a gentle, gradual, step-by-step process. And third, and this one is absolutely the key to the whole thing, God works with our nature as human beings, not against it. This third principle is so important that the author actually drops the original Latin on us. Omnia movit secundum modum eorum. Now, that just means God moves each thing according to its own mode or its own nature. Simple as that. So what's our nature? Well, we learn through our senses, right? And that means that's exactly where the journey has to start.
And boom, right there, that's the core of the whole answer. If God works with our nature, and our nature is to experience the world through our senses, then the spiritual journey has to begin with the senses. It's all about meeting us exactly where we are. So if you're gonna lift a soul from what he calls the low state, our normal everyday perception, all the way up to the high state of spiritual union, well, you've got to start by connecting with that low state first. The senses are that first point of contact. They're the only logical starting line for this race. Now, it's really important to get what he means by the senses here. It's not just about, seeing and hearing. He's talking about the whole package of our tangible experience, our imagination, our meditations, any kind of understanding that depends on pictures or forms. It's all that stuff. So this whole approach of starting with the senses, it totally respects our human nature, and it follows that rule of gradual step-by-step progress. It gets the soul ready for what's coming next. Trying to just slam the human and the divine together all at once, that would completely break the rules of order he just laid out. Instead, a bridge has to be built, one piece at a time. But, and this is a huge but, this first stage is just that. It's only the beginning. To explain what comes next, the author uses this really powerful analogy about growing up. I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? The food that a baby needs is totally different from the food an adult needs.
And to really drive this point home, he brings in that super famous line from St. Paul. You know the one. When I was a child, I put away childish things. This whole idea of putting away childish things becomes the perfect metaphor for our spiritual growth. Something that was once totally helpful, even necessary, eventually has to be left behind for something, more grown-up. So the analogy just lays it all out, right? On one hand, you have spiritual childhood. This stage relies on tangible things, senses, visions, images. That's the milk. But on the other hand, you have spiritual adulthood. That's when you move beyond all that and start to rely on pure spirit, on contemplation. That's the solid food, the stuff that gives you real lasting strength. And again, he's not just hinting at this. The text is super explicit. It quotes that passage about giving milk to drink and not solid food to people who aren't ready for it yet. The visions are the milk. They're designed to nourish us just for a little while, only until we're strong enough to handle something more substantial. And this brings us to probably the most critical takeaway of this whole thing. These sensory experiences, these visions, they are never the destination. They're the vehicle that gets you there. They're the training wheels on the bike. And clinging to them after they've done their job, it's like refusing to ever take the training wheels off. It doesn't keep you safe, it just stops you from ever really learning how to ride.
So you might be asking, okay, what's the big deal? What's the real benefit of letting all this go? Why is it so important to move on? Well, the author gives us some really clear and honestly super compelling reasons why we have to graduate from this first stage.
Okay, so first, the actual spiritual benefit you receive becomes way more pure, way more substantial, because it's not being filtered through our messy, imperfect senses anymore. And second, and this is a big one, you're finally free from that huge, stressful burden of trying to figure out if a vision is real or fake. The author literally calls that whole process a waste of time and a hindrance. You get to stop worrying about that and just focus on the real work. When you boil it all down, the entire argument comes down to this one simple idea. True spiritual growth is a journey away from the tangible and toward the intangible. It's moving from the outward form to the inner substance. It's about wanting the giver, not just the gifts he gives. And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. This whole model, it's not just for some ancient mystic, right? It's a pattern of growth that applies to all of us in so many areas of life. So the question to leave you with is this. In your own life, right now, what's the milk? What's that comfortable first-level way of understanding something that you've been relying on that might actually be holding you back from the solid food, from that next level you're being called to?